What if the reason you can't break your bad habits isn't, a lack of willpower, but actually a flaw in your mathematical syntax?
Right, a structural issue.
Exactly. Like, what if the feeling of being stuck in your career or maybe in a relationship or honestly just in your own head isn't an emotional failing at all? What if it's an architectural collapse?
Yeah, that's the core question, really.
It is. So, welcome back to the deep dive, everyone. Today, we are taking personal growth out of that romantic, unpredictable garden of organic spontaneity, and we're just handing it straight over to the civil engineers.
Which is a profound paradigm shift,
Mm.
because we spend so much of our lives operating under this assumption that growth is just something that happens to us.
Yeah, like if we just try hard enough.
Right. Provided we have the right intentions and put in enough effort, it'll work out. We act like passengers in our own minds, basically just hoping the driver knows where we're going.
I mean, I've definitely been that passenger. And for a while, that works. But today's journey is crafted specifically for you, like the listener who has hit the absolute ceiling of just trying hard.
Yeah, the people who are ready to gain profound structural knowledge and do it quickly.
Exactly. We are looking at the ultimate culmination of the architect of your own meaning material today. We are moving from being passengers to becoming the ultimate system administrators of our own lives.
It's an ambitious agenda, but I'm ready for it.
Me too. So here's the roadmap. First, we're doing a double feature covering chapters Y and Z.
The highly anticipated ones.
Oh, yeah. Which transition us from theory into the actual architectural mapping of the future. Then we'll execute an alpha workdown, integrating the entire A to Z Meta-Matics journey into one cohesive perspective.
And that leads right into the testing experimentation phase.
Yes, where we decode the most complex mathematical representation of the self ever mapped the full expression equation.
Which is intense, but we'll get through it.
We will. And finally, we're going to transcend the math entirely, arriving at the non-dual awareness of the grin. So, okay, let's unpack this, because we are moving from being passengers in our own minds to the ultimate system administrators.
I love that phrase.
Yeah.
And to do that, we really have to talk about the transition from intuition to conscious design.
Which happens in chapters Y and Z, right?
Yeah, it's the core friction of those chapters. If you look at the earlier parts of the source material, there was this heavy emphasis on building your life by feel.
Like trial and error.
Exactly. It was about embodied practice, making mistakes, feeling the feedback loop of reality, and just relying on your gut. It's the lived, messy experience of transformation.
Which is very human.
It is. But chapters Y and Z represent a very strict graduation from that. You're moving from what we might call unconscious competence into conscious mathematical mastery.
So let's look at chapter Y first. It focuses on topological mapping, multidimensional graphing, and what the text calls the architecture of futures.
It's such a great term.
It really is. When I first read that, my mind immediately went to science fiction.
Oh, totally. Like world building in a novel?
Right, but it's not fiction. It is the practice of using mathematics as a literal tool for prediction. You are conceptually building worlds before you ever have to actually live in them.
Think about what a topological map actually does in the real world. It doesn't just show you where the mountains and valleys are.
Right, it shows elevation.
Exactly. It shows elevation, the steepness, the structural realities of the terrain. So when you apply that to your own future, you aren't just making like a 5-year plan or a cute vision board.
You're mapping the structural load of your decisions.
Precisely. Let's say you decide to take a massive promotion that requires 60-hour work weeks. You aren't just changing your career trajectory. You are applying a massive structural load to your relationship sector.
In your health sector, your psychological baseline, everything.
Right. You are graphing the downstream consequences across multiple dimensions. And this is why formalization is so deeply necessary.
Because doing it by feel just isn't enough anymore.
Well, when you are just operating by feel, that unconscious competence, you might be doing things very well for a while. You might have great habits and a solid trajectory.
Sure.
But if you don't know why those things are working mechanically, you cannot replicate your success when the environment changes.
Right. If a crisis hits, you're lost.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Conscious mastery means you see the load-bearing walls of your life. You can adapt the principles to completely novel, high-stress situations because you understand the architecture beneath the drywall.
But I have to push back here for a second because this brings us to chapter Z. And that is the literal practice manual.
Oh, yeah, the workbook section.
Right. The author provides 50 pre-built equations, 10 resolution worksheets, all these ready-to-use mathematical templates for human behavior. And as I was reading through these, formulas, I felt this distinct
Which
resistance.
is totally normal.
Doesn't formalizing your life with math equations make it incredibly robotic? Like if I am constantly running an equation on my marriage or my creative goals, don't I lose the
The
humanity?
spontaneity of it all.
Yeah, it just feels so rigid.
It's the most common and frankly the most valid initial critique of the system. We equate math with rigidity, and we equate equations with a lack of emotion.
Exactly.
But what did the text ultimately reveal to you about that friction? Did it stay rigid for you?
Well, no. I started thinking about it mechanically, and this analogy clicked for me. Tell me if this tracks with the system.
Okay, let's hear it.
It feels like moving from playing the piano purely by ear to suddenly learning how to read and write sheet music.
Oh, that's a great way to look at it.
Right, because playing by ear is beautiful. You feel the music deeply, you play with soul, but your repertoire is fundamentally limited by what you can memorize and what you can physically hear.
You hit a ceiling.
Exactly. And then you learn the mathematics of music. You learn time signatures, chord progressions, the syntax of the notes on the page.
Right.
You aren't losing the music. You aren't becoming a robot. You are actually gaining the ability to compose a symphony that you could never have held in your head all at once.
That is exactly how the architecture functions. What's fascinating here is that intuition, when backed by rigorous systemic architecture, scales infinitely.
It scales. Wow.
Yeah. You don't stop feeling the music when you learn to read notes. You actually begin to understand the harmonic structures that make the music soar in the first place.
That makes so much sense.
Formalizing your life through Meta-Matics frees up your cognitive load. You aren't constantly guessing what to do next or relying on the fragile resource of daily willpower. You have a blueprint.
You have the sheet music for your own evolution.
Exactly. But to read that sheet music, you have to understand the grammar it's written in.
Which brings us perfectly to the alpha breakdown. We need to integrate this entire A to Z journey.
The universal grammar of concept mapping.
Right. And to do that, we have to look at the mechanics of how the system generates meaning. The texts connect this pseudo-algebraic concept mapping system to Noam Chomsky's theory of universal grammar.
Which is quite the leap, conceptually.
I'll be honest, seeing Chomsky dropped into a text about systemic personal architecture was a massive intellectual collision for me.
It's a brilliant synthesis, but it requires us to really understand what universal grammar actually implies mechanically.
So break that down for us.
Well, Chomsky posited that human language generates infinite meaning from a finite set of syntactic rules. The pseudo-algebra we were working with here isn't just a quirky math trick or a neat way to write down self-help goals.
Right, it's deeper than that.
It mirrors the fundamental way human consciousness generates reality. Just as syntax uses specific rules to create infinite sentences, mathematics uses specific operators to map infinite human transformations.
Okay, let's actually break down those operators because they are basically the verbs of this grammar.
Right, the actions.
We have division, which the text uses for filtering or constraining. We have multiplication, used for synergistic amplification.
Which is a huge one we'll get to later.
Definitely. Then we have addition for simple synthesis. And finally, we have the synthesis operator, which is represented by a circle with a cross in it.
Yeah, and that one denotes emergence, the creation of a completely new state.
Right. So you are learning the syntax of change. And the text traces this all the way back to what it calls the event atom, which was first defined back in chapter F.
Ah, yes, the foundational starting point.
Exactly. The event atom is the irreducible core truth of a situation before you apply any narrative, any bias, or any emotional weight to it. It is the raw noun.
And once you isolate that raw noun, that event atom, you run it through the 11-step operational flow.
You apply the grammar to it.
Exactly. You start combining the atoms into molecules and then into complex structures. And the most elegant architecture the text builds with this grammar is the dynamic root square.
Oh man, the dynamic root square. I want to spend some real time on this because the mechanics here just blew my mind.
It's where the math really starts to explain the how of human capability, not just the what.
Right. So it starts at the granular level. You have 3 named fruits. And a fruit is just a specific, actionable behavior or skill.
Give us an example to ground it.
Okay, let's say in the context of leadership. Fruit 1 is active listening. Fruit 2 is conflict resolution. Fruit 3 is strategic delegation.
Okay, 3 distinct skills.
Right, but the text insists that those 3 fruits only make up 75% of the next structural level. The remaining 25% is the overlap.
The emergent space.
Yes. And that 75% component parts plus the 25% emergent overlap gives you one leaf.
Right.
But why 25%? Like, how does the math justify that specific ratio of emergence?
Because isolated skills have diminishing returns. If you are an incredible active listener but you cannot resolve conflict, your listening eventually just becomes passive enabling.
Oh, wow. That's so true.
The 25% overlap is the synthesis operator in action. It's what happens when active listening and conflict resolution interact under pressure.
They create something new.
Exactly. The friction between those two skills generates a novel capability. Perhaps the ability to de-escalate a hostile negotiation without yielding your core boundaries. That novel capability doesn't exist in either fruit independently. It only exists in the overlap.
And then the fractal pattern just continues. You take 3 leaves plus their 25% emergent overlap, and that combination gives you one branch.
Right, scaling up again.
And the system defines 4 ultimate branches that make up a human life: power, presence, purpose, and proclivity. Those 4 branches integrate to form the root, the core self.
And this structural understanding leads us directly into what the text calls the linguistic mastery equation.
Which is where things get really intense.
It is. This is where the grammar of change meets the compounding nature of algebra.
It's the compounding effect. This is the part that made me realize how high the stakes actually are with this system.
Well, the equation states that your total capability is not just the sum of your skills. It is the multiplicative intersection of every skill you've built, exponentially amplified by how they all interact.
So it's multiplying, not adding.
Right. Mathematically, it's represented as total capability equals C1 times C2 all the way to C, multiplied by the product of 1 plus alpha.
Okay, unpack alpha for us, because that seems to be the ghost in the machine here.
Alpha is the cascading integration factor. Linguistically, it means your mastery equals every transformation you complete, multiplied by the cascading amplification of everything you have already become.
Give me a real-world mapping of that.
Sure. Let's say your physical discipline running every morning, for example, doesn't just sit in a silo. It amplifies your cognitive focus at work.
Right, they feed into each other.
Exactly. And then your cognitive focus amplifies your emotional regulation when you get home. They multiply each other. The alpha is the degree to which your system is open and integrated, allowing those skills to cross-pollinate.
But wait, this is where I need to push back again. Because if the architecture demands that everything multiplies everything else, doesn't that imply a terrifying vulnerability?
In what way?
Like, if a positive skill compounds, doesn't a toxic habit or a massive blind spot exponentially crash the entire system? How does this architecture prevent a cascading failure?
That is the exact vulnerability of any highly integrated system. If you introduce a corrupted variable into a multiplicative equation, the corruption scales just as fast as the mastery.
It's a double-edged sword.
It really is. And the text doesn't shy away from this. In fact, it provides a very stark structural case study of what happens when a system becomes entirely rigid and refuses to integrate accurate data.
Right. The text examines World War II military strategy, specifically the collapse of the Axis powers.
Yes. And I want to be incredibly explicit here for you, the listener. We are neutrally analyzing the historical example provided in the text. We are strictly looking at the structural failure of a system.
Absolutely. We are not endorsing any political ideologies here at all. We are impartially reporting on the content provided to convey the ideas of systemic failure, just looking at the math.
Right. So from a Meta-Matics perspective, the failure was rooted in a few deeply flawed, unyielding inputs. The text cites a myth of divine infallibility and a fiction of enemy inferiority.
And structurally, those aren't just bad ideas. They are basically algorithmic hard codes that corrupt the data intake.
Exactly. If your system assumes infallibility, it physically cannot process negative feedback. It treats all contradictory evidence as noise rather than signal.
The text mentions a complete rejection of what it calls empathetic research.
Yes.
And empathetic research doesn't mean feeling sorry for your opponent. It means the rigorous, structural willingness to understand your opponent's capabilities, their adaptability, and their humanity.
Which they completely ignored. It was a supremely rigid, dualistic system. Because the ideology demanded that opponents were inferior, the system refused to update its operating system.
It just stuck to its flawed assumptions.
Right. It couldn't accurately map the immense industrial capacity of the United States or the sheer geographical and human resilience of the Soviet Union. It was a system that was entirely obsessed with wielding power, but it possessed absolutely zero capacity to yield to reality.
And mathematically, a system that cannot yield cannot adapt.
It becomes brittle, and brittle systems shatter under pressure.
So why does this matter to you listening right now? I mean, we are talking about the largest geopolitical conflict in human history, but the math applies identically to your daily life.
It scales all the way down to the individual.
Exactly, because when you refuse to iterate, when you refuse to recognize the value of opposing forces, or when you ignore feedback that challenges your self-image, your personal architecture becomes fragile.
You become brittle.
Right. True integration requires the humility to be shaped by your environment. You have to yield while simultaneously acting upon your environment, which is wielding.
That tension, the continuous dynamic friction between yielding and wielding, is the secret to systemic longevity. You cannot just force your will upon the world, and you cannot just passively let the world happen to you.
You have to synchronize the two.
Exactly.
And synchronizing that tension brings us to the absolute core of today's deep dive. We are entering the testing experimentation phase.
My favorite part.
It's so good. We are going to deconstruct the ultimate diagnostic tool in the Meta-Matics system, the full expression equation.
Now, if you are looking at the source text, this equation is intimidating. It takes up half a page.
Well, it's huge. It is a massive multi-tiered fraction wrapped in braces, brackets, and parentheses. And I am not going to read the raw syntax aloud because it is honestly unlistenable.
And it misses the point entirely.
Right. The power of this equation isn't in memorizing the letters, it's in visualizing the spatial architecture of it.
Let's translate the math into audio-friendly spatial concepts. Let's look at the architecture of the equation's left side first.
Okay, so imagine a massive fraction. This left side represents your initial stance in the world, your default operating procedure.
Got it.
On the top of this fraction, in the numerator, you have the forces you control, the variables you are actively wielding. On the bottom, in the denominator, you have the forces that control you, the variables you are yielding to.
Right, and the text uses the notation A over 1 and 1 over B. The 1 represents you, the conscious self.
Okay.
When you are the 1 in the denominator, you are supporting the action. You are wielding variable A. When the 1 is in the numerator, you are being supported by or yielding to variable B.
Let's ground this with a real-world example so you can map this onto your own life right now. Let's say variable A. The thing on top, the thing you are wielding, is your raw ambition.
Okay, your drive.
Right, your drive to build a company or get a promotion. You are pushing the gas pedal. Variable B, the thing on the bottom, the thing you are yielding to, is the reality of your current financial runway.
So you are yielding to the constraint of your budget.
Exactly.
All right.
Perfect.
So your initial stance is wielding ambition, yielding to financial constraints. The equation connects these two states with the synthesis operator, the circle with the cross.
Meaning they aren't separate.
Right. It means that wielding your ambition and yielding to your budget are not happening in isolation. They are synthesized into a single emergent state of action. You are actively driving forward while simultaneously being structured by your constraints.
And importantly, that entire synthesized block is governed by the overarching one of the conscious self.
Meaning you are awake to the process. You are the system administrator managing that balance.
But that is only the left half of the equation. That's just the setup.
Oh, yeah. The right half is where the brilliance of this architecture truly reveals itself.
It really is. The right half is the exact mirror. It is the formalization of what the text calls the inversion kick.
The inversion kick is the ultimate diagnostic test of your structural integrity. In the right half of the equation, the variables you controlled now control you, and the variables you yielded to, you now wield.
You flip the fraction. I was trying to figure out how to explain the friction of this inversion, and I realized it's exactly like driving a manual transmission car.
Oh, that's an interesting mapping. Walk me through it.
Okay, so when you are accelerating, you are wielding the gas pedal, you're pushing it down, driving the power. At the same time, you are yielding to the clutch. You let it out, letting the transmission engage.
Wielding the gas, yielding to the clutch, makes sense.
But what happens when you need to shift gears? What happens when the environment demands a change in speed or torque? You have to execute an inversion kick.
You have to flip the inputs entirely.
Exactly. Suddenly, you have to yield to the gas, pulling your foot off the power, and you have to aggressively wield the clutch, pushing it to the floor to disengage the engine.
Right.
If you refuse to execute that inversion, if you try to just keep wielding the gas and wielding the clutch at the same time, you strict the gears, The engine screams, the car jerks, and the system eventually destroys itself.
That is a phenomenal analogy for the mechanics of the full expression equation.
Thanks. It just made it click for me.
If we take your earlier example, you were wielding ambition and yielding to financial constraints. The inversion kick demands that you flip it. It demands that you test your capacity to inhabit the opposite mode.
So what does that actually look like? Yielding to ambition and wielding constraints.
Well, it means humbly accepting the timeline that your ambition requires, rather than forcing it to happen overnight. You yield to the reality of the goal scale.
Oh, wow.
And wielding your constraints means actively, aggressively designing a hyper-efficient financial protocol, turning your budget into a weapon of focus rather than just a passive limitation.
This is where it gets incredibly uncomfortable, because what happens if you refuse to flip? What happens if you are perfectly happy wielding your ambition, but the moment you are asked to yield to the timeline, you just throw a tantrum?
Then the equation reveals a massive hidden bias in your architecture. It reveals that your mastery is asymmetrical.
You're unbalanced.
Exactly. You are only comfortable when you are in the dominant wielding position. You lack the structural capacity to yield. And as we learned from the historical case study, a system that cannot yield will inevitably shatter.
Right.
The inversion kick forces you to test your capacity to fluidly inhabit both modes for every single variable in your life.
And sitting right in the middle of these two massive halves of the equation, bridging the initial stance on the left and the inverted stance on the right, is the asterisk, the multiplication operator.
Synergistic amplification.
Right.
This operator is the linchpin of the entire system.
It's the alpha all over again.
Right. It means that your initial orientation and your inverted orientation do not just happen sequentially. They don't just sit next to each other. They multiply each other's effectiveness.
Explain the mechanics of that multiplication. How does yielding amplify wielding?
Think back to the dynamic root square, the 25% emergent overlap.
Okay, the synthesis?
When you actively drive your ambition, you possess the profound, humble capacity to yield to the required timeline. Those two postures amplify your overall endurance.
Because you aren't fighting reality.
Precisely. You don't burn out because the yielding provides the recovery space for the wielding. You don't just oscillate randomly between controlling things and surrendering to things. You consciously govern the alternation.
And this produces the fourth quarter principle. The fusion of the left side and the right side creates a fourth quarter in your operational capacity, a completely new capability that neither stance could produce on its own.
It's emergence at the highest level.
It is. The left half builds the plug, the right half builds the outlet, and the multiplication operator is the exact moment you bridge them and the current flows.
Which is exactly why the text calls this comprehensive comprehension. You aren't just understanding a concept intellectually.
You're living it.
Yes. You are mapping its physical, behavioral, structural load across all four branches of your life: power, presence, purpose, and proclivity.
So if you are feeling stuck in any of those branches, you can just run this diagnostic equation.
You can look at your life and say, where am I refusing to execute the inversion kick? Where am I stuck wielding the gas and stripping my own gears?
It gives you the power to debug your own operating system. You are the architect. You are the system administrator.
You are, up to a point.
Right, up to a point. And this is where the deep dive takes a turn that I genuinely did not see coming.
It's quite the pivot.
I mean, we have spent this entire time building the math. We have defined the operators. We have structured the fractions. We have built this impenetrable, incredibly dense, perfectly logical cage of self-mastery.
The ultimate scaffolding.
Yes. And then we turn the page to Chapter W.
Chapter W, comprehensive comprehension and the dissolution of structure.
The dissolution. We build the ultimate mathematical structure just to watch it dissolve. I honestly felt a little betrayed reading it the first time.
I get that, but it happens because the math is not the territory. The math is just the map. This is the transition into the fourth and final phase of our deep dive, the grin.
I was trying to figure out how to frame this transition because it feels so abrupt in the text. You go from intense pseudo-algebra straight into raw mystical poetry.
It feels abrupt, yeah, but it is structurally inevitable. Think about the equation we just mapped, the full expression.
Okay.
The entire massive structure, the yielding, the wielding, the inversions, the amplification, every single piece of it is governed by the one over the entire fraction.
The conscious self, the system administrator we've been talking about.
Yes, but as you perfect the math, as you clear away all your biases and asymmetrical flaws through the inversion kick, The Grun begins to realize something deeply profound.
What does it realize?
It realizes that it is not separate from the variables it is mapping. The one that is observing the equation is made of the exact same substance as the variables inside the equation. The observer and the observed are identical.
Oh, wow. It's like building scaffolding to paint the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. You need the scaffolding. You absolutely must have the rigid mathematical structure to reach the height required to do the work.
You can't paint the ceiling from the floor.
Right. But once the masterpiece is finished, you don't leave the scaffolding up. You take it down, the structure dissolves, and only the art remains.
That is a beautiful way to understand Chapter W. The texts introduce this dissolution through a metaphysical poem titled, Who is the Grin?
The grin.
Yeah. The Grin acts as an identity riddle. It's a threshold guardian between the realm of mathematics and the realm of pure, non-dual awareness.
The poem is staggering. Let me quote a couple of lines because they force the brain to stop calculating and start experiencing.
Please, good.
The poem asks, who is the grin? For in is I, wherever is I am, in and myself are one.
This is the realization of non-dual awareness. It's basically raw Advaita Vedanta poetry right in the middle of a math textbook. We spend our entire lives, and indeed the first 3/4 of this deep dive, operating in a world of duality. Me versus you, subject versus object, wielding versus yielding.
But the poem teaches that the observer, the I, and the world, the in, are fundamentally inseparable.
Exactly.
The poem plays with language to intentionally break your dualistic thinking. There is this line that I had to read 5 times. It says, bet neither, be either only akin. It completely collapses the concept of either or. There is no either or in reality. There is only kinship. There is only unity.
It shifts the entire paradigm of the Meta-Matics journey. All those dualities we use to map our relationships, iterator versus delineator, top of the fraction versus bottom of the fraction. The Grin reveals that these were just operational tools.
Just the scaffolding.
Right. They are highly effective for navigating the physical world, but they are not the ultimate reality of who you are.
But the text doesn't just leave you floating in the esoteric ether, which I appreciate. It actually provides specific mechanical, meditative exercises to practice this non-dual awareness. It grounds the poetry in practice.
Yes, the author is still an architect at heart. One of the primary exercises is the contemplative gaze, which the poem cryptically refers to as Ion Door.
Walk us through the mechanics of Ion Door. How do you actually practice it?
It is the practice of witnessing the interchange between the self and the world. You fix your gaze on an object, a door, a tree, a wall, whatever. And instead of looking at it as a separate object, you hold the awareness that the consciousness looking out through your eyes is the exact same consciousness that constitutes the atoms of the door.
You let the boundary between in here and out there soften until it vanishes.
Exactly. You realize the I and the in are one.
And the second practice is the endurance mantra. The phrase is, I endure while in becomes the same.
This is about resting as the unchanging field of awareness while the forms of the world shift and fluctuate around you. Your emotions change, your circumstances change, the variables in your full expression equation change.
Right, the math keeps running.
Yes, but the underlying awareness endures. It remains perfectly still.
You know, it's like spending 100 hours in an RPG video game. You spend all this time mastering the mechanics, the math, optimizing your inventory, grinding for stats.
Right.
But non-dual awareness is the moment you realize you aren't just the avatar holding the sword. You are the code, you are the screen, and you are the electricity powering the console.
That's it exactly. And this resolves a friction I've felt throughout this entire study. We've talked so much about control today. Becoming the system administrator. Diagnosing your biases.
It's exhausting.
It can be. It can feel like a tremendous amount of pressure to constantly optimize your life.
Yeah.
But the Grin is the release valve.
It is the ultimate release valve because what happens when you fully integrate the Grin? What happens to the one in the Meta-Matics equations?
It stops being an isolated ego trying to control the variables, and it becomes the field itself. The texts talk about this unwitnessed force, the animating energy of life. If we connect the poetry back to the math, that unwitnessed force is the exact same thing as the position of one.
Yes, that is the synthesis of the entire source material. The math is the spirituality. The ultimate realization of the architect is that the builder, the blueprint, and the building are all one unified field of awareness.
You aren't just solving the equation, you are the equation.
It elevates this entire framework from systemic self-help to profound self-realization.
And it ensures that your mastery doesn't become a trap. If you only master the math, You become a rigid dictator of your own life. You become the historical case study we analyzed earlier, unable to yield, obsessed with control.
Griddle.
Very brittle. But when the map dissolves into the grin, you achieve true fluidity. You could build the most complex, load-bearing architecture for your career or your family and simultaneously know that you are completely free from it.
Okay, let's take a collective breath. Because the scope of what we have covered today is just massive.
We really went everywhere.
We did. You, the listener, have journeyed from the very granular topological mapping of your future in chapters Y and Z. We traced the alpha breakdown, watching the event atom evolve through the grammar of change.
Creating the dynamic root square and compounding through the linguistic mastery equation.
We stared down the massive full expression equation. We learned how to execute the inversion kick, how to diagnose our asymmetrical biases, and how yielding and wielding multiply each other to create entirely new capacities.
And finally, we climbed to the top of that mathematical scaffolding, only to watch it dissolve into the profound, non-dual unity of the grin.
We realized that the I and the in are one.
And I want to gently remind you that while we have traveled through intense theory and mystical poetry, you now possess the most practical meta-operating system possible.
It's extremely practical.
Whether you are navigating a deeply frustrating conflict at work, trying to map out a 10-year vision for your family, or simply sitting in quiet meditation, you have the tools. You can debug your code, you can rewrite your syntax, you can truly architect your own meaning.
You are no longer the passenger. But as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with one final lingering thought, a question to ponder as you step back out into the world.
Okay, let's hear it.
We started this hour talking about civil engineering, how an architect looks at a skyscraper and sees the structural loads, the foundation, the hidden forces at play.
The architecture beneath the surface.
Exactly. But now, taking everything we've learned all the way up to the dissolution of the grin. If the I and the in are truly one, if the world you are mapping is actually just a reflection of the mind doing the mapping,
Right.
then the next time you face a seemingly insurmountable obstacle, a concrete wall blocking your path in that skyscraper, what are you going to do? Are you going to strip your gears trying to fight it? Or are you going to execute the inversion kick, soften your gaze, and recognize that wall as just another part of yourself patiently waiting to be integrated?
That's the real test. Until next time.